How's it going, everybody? It's Ben from the Ben and Bev channel, and today I'm excited to bring you a review for Moon Knight's third episode, The Friendly Type. At the end of last week's episode, Mark Spector / Stephen Grant / Moon Knight.
We're just going to call him Moon Knight from here on out because that covers all of the personalities, including Khonshu and anyone else that might be popping up along the way.
The episode ended with Moon Knight waking up as Mark Spector with a bottle of liquor clutched in his hand, swelling to a close with Hesham Naza's phenomenal soundtrack as we get a sweeping view of the pyramids of Giza, our arrival into Egypt. The episode rolls out showing us the scene of Layla getting a passport to go to Egypt. It's a solid scene showing us an interesting dynamic between Layla and her family member who helps her travel across the world and re-steal all of these archaeological treasures. She's stealing them for a good cause. We're not really sure what exactly it is she's doing. In fact, this introductory scene really just sets up more questions than it does answers about her character. It adds even further to this conflict that we have in the show. Here we switch over to Mark, who's in Egypt doing a rooftop chase sequence as Mark Spector, not as Moon Knight. It's actually a really impressive set of fight sequences, super engaging camera angles with really clean and heavy impact hit. Though Mark isn't pulling any of his punches, Steven immediately seizes control and tries to prevent Mark from killing or maiming any of these people too badly. This inner turmoil where both Mark and Steven say they're not responsible for killing people so violently leads us as the viewer to be really curious, is it Khonshu that's doing it, or perhaps there's even another personality?
Maybe they're going to throw Jake in there. Who knows?
And while these perceptual shifts between Steven and Mark continue for the beginning of the episode, they actually die down with the appearance of Layla, because I believe that both Steven and Mark don't want to expose their illness in front of her. Both of them have feelings for her to some extent. Mark is really just trying to push her away, and Steven just really wants to get to know her and understand why he is involved with all of this in the first place, and why he would even divorce someone like that to begin with. It's a really interesting dynamic, and we stay in Mark's body for most of this first part of the episode, but you really feel Steven's presence lingering over everything. As the discussion between Layla and Mark, it's really just about his illness and the confusion of why she didn't notice before, and a little bit of guilt she feels for him not telling her, and Mark doesn't want her to have to do anything with this, and that's why he's divorcing her in the first place. He's tied up in such a mess with Khonshu and the whole Aeneid of Egyptian gods. More on that later. He just doesn't want her to get hurt. I really also wanted to point out how Calamawy did a phenomenal job this episode. Her presence is known. As soon as she shows up in those first 20 minutes in Egypt, we're in for an emotional ride. The pain on her face when she's arguing with Mark, you can still see there's a little bit of sympathy at the edges of her smile, and when we get to the latter part of the episode with Steven in the body, you can tell that even though she really feels bad for him and wants to be with him, there's still this little bit of pain in her, because part of this is Mark. Part of this is still the man that abandoned her, and she just really can't come to terms with either half for their biggest features or their flaws. In the inner conflict between the two couldn't be even more prominent, especially with a lot more Khonshu in this episode interacting with both Steven and Mark, as well as interactions with the Aeneid and their avatars. I don't want to go too far into that. There's some pretty mind-blowing cosmic stuff they end up bringing to the MCU with it. It's really cool to think that there's a bunch of different deities that are choosing not to interact with humanity in this universe.
Very similar to Eternals in that aspect.
But this whole relationship between the gods and how Khonshu's already been banished for making mistakes in his past and being greedy, it's a very severe conflict for someone as broken as Mark Spector, and the Aeneid even recognizes this themselves. Also really cool to see Arthur Harrow once again present and speaking directly to Mark. His presence has been known in every episode, and Hawke once again killed it in this one. Well, there's a lot more of the Egyptian god angle in this. There's also a bunch more of the swashbuckling Indiana Jones stuff as well. Besides the rooftop and knife-wielding fight scene that I mentioned to open the episode, we also get a phenomenal set of sequences with a character named Mogar, played by the late Gaspard Ulliel. As soon as he's on screen and you're at his weird, artsy, jousting Egyptology compound, really enigmatic character. His fairly ambiguous ending, and I'm not sure if they changed that because of what happened to him. He has a bigger role in the season as a whole. I hope he does, because his character was phenomenal for the brief bits that we saw him. And this group of collectors hiding out in a private compound in Egypt, collecting history for the sake of preservation, but really just to fuel their own ego, is something entirely believable, extremely reminiscent of Indiana Jones. We get a great set of fight scenes near the end of that. A really big one actually being for Layla, as they go to try and solve some things on their own, as they need to find out some information from a sarcophagus to understand the source of navigation for finding Ahmet's tomb.
Other than the scarab compass that they lost in last week's episode.
Her fight scene had heavy impact, and she found ways to outsmart her much larger and stronger opponent. It's interspersed with Mark / Steven's fight scene, where he's both Mr. Knight and Moon Knight, fighting a bunch of people on a jousting field. Really stunning visual palette for this fight scene. And much like last week's episode, these further revelations and questions that end up getting brought up in these closing scenes actually push everything in a whole new light than we ever expected this to go. A much more cosmic and spacey direction. There's some seriously stunning Egyptology fantasy moments at the very end of this episode. Seriously crazy twists, and the show just climbs to new heights with each and every week for me. My only guess for next week would be maybe that they're doing the Mr. Knight angle at some point. I know there's been those scenes recently on the teasers of them in an asylum with him in a white uniform, very similar to that Lemire set of the comic book run. And with the way this episode ends with a new set of conflict, some seriously unresolved tension, could be leading us to that Asylum episode sooner rather than later. That's just a prediction though. I really have no idea where the show could go. That's just a guess. Nothing about this episode really points in any solid direction. As a solo vehicle for a character, this show is functioning exceptionally well. I can't wait to tune in next week. I know he's my favorite character and I'm probably super biased here, but
man, this is a thrill ride.
Have you guys seen Moon Knight's newest episode? Let us know what you thought about it in the comments below, and watch out later this week as we're getting a review for one of my favorite movies of the year so far, as well as a review for a movie that really let me down. We'll see you guys next time. Ben and Bev, out.